In the middle of a bustling city, surrounded by towering buildings and streams of people, someone stood still amidst the crowd, their voice ringing out with joy and relief. They had finally graduated. But instead of pure happiness, there was a hint of frustration in their tone. They couldn't help but question why, in a world where everyone was striving to develop supernatural abilities, they were still expected to take traditional exams and write essays like in the old days. Elsewhere in the city, a girl walked alongside a boy, both of them holding books in their hands. She calmly explained that basic education still mattered. Not everyone could rely on supernatural powers to build a future. Some students at their school couldn't even afford something as fundamental as a power book, which was essential for developing abilities. A black-haired boy chimed in, clarifying that those students had to wait until they joined the military academy, where the government would assign them power books free of charge. This revelation surprised one of the other boys in the group, who expressed disbelief that people could actually get such important resources without paying. From his point of view, it felt unfair, especially since his own family had spent a fortune to secure his power book. But another boy, walking ahead of them and not even turning to look back, gave a dismissive reply. In his view, there was nothing to envy. Free power books didn't offer high-quality skills anyway. He pointed out that unless these students were required to attend the academy for 2 more years after graduation, they might never have had the chance to awaken supernatural powers in the first place. One of the others agreed, but added that the ones who were truly blessed were those born with powers. He admired them, saying they were the real chosen ones. Without their willingness to share their powers with others, ordinary people wouldn't even have a chance to become ability users. That comment sparked a defensive response. Someone reminded him that these gifted individuals hadn't really had a choice. When the Dalki had appeared at their doorstep, threatening everyone's survival, they had been forced to step up and fight. Still, the speaker made it clear that he had no intention of going to any battlefield. If others wanted to risk their lives, that was their choice. As for him, his future was already set. His father had arranged everything. All he needed to do was raise his enhancement power to level 5 during his academy years, and he'd take over the family's fashion business. As their conversation continued, they passed by a girl with green hair who was waiting eagerly for someone. Her eyes lit up when she spotted a red-haired boy approaching. She was thrilled. Rayleigh had shown up at school today. She wasn't the only one who noticed. A group of nearby girls blushed and whispered excitedly among themselves, stunned at how much more attractive he looked in person compared to photos. They wondered which academy he'd be placed in and agreed it would definitely be one of the top ones. After all, he was the only student in their year who had managed to reach level 4. The green-haired girl, unable to hold back her excitement, walked up and stood in front of Rayleigh. She nervously asked if she could talk to him for a moment. Rayleigh looked at her, slightly surprised, and calmly asked what was going on. She hesitated for a second and then asked if he was free for dinner that evening. Rayleigh replied in a neutral tone, saying he didn't have anything planned. Just as she was about to say more, their moment was interrupted. A black-haired boy suddenly sprinted through the area at full speed, clearly being chased by someone. The pursuer yelled after him, demanding that he stop if he had any guts. But the boy on the run mockingly held up his hand with a universal rude gesture and teased his pursuer, asking if he'd managed to count how many fingers were being shown, clearly meant to provoke. The comment hit a nerve. The boy chasing him burst out angrily, demanding to know if he was looking for a fight. As the distance between them grew, the pursuer shouted one last warning. He better not get caught again. Just as the boy continued taunting his pursuer, he made the same rude gesture again, mocking him with exaggerated sarcasm, pretending to be scared. But he wasn't watching where he was going and ended up bumping straight into the red-haired boy. The impact knocked him down to the ground. He winced in pain, clutching his head with his hand and groaning from where he lay. The green-haired girl, seeing the whole thing unfold, immediately looked at the boy with concern. She asked if he was okay, but before she could say more, the 2 boys who had been chasing him finally caught up. Without hesitation, they started beating him up, right there in the middle of the street, in front of the shocked girl. One of them shouted at him to run again, daring him to try. Another mocked him by holding up his own fingers, taunting him with the same joke he had made earlier. They demanded that he show his hand now, yelling at him to hold up his own fingers. The boy could only grunt in pain under the assault. The green-haired girl froze in place, completely stunned by the sudden violence. But then, something unexpected happened. But then, without warning, the red-haired boy suddenly activated a strange power in his hand. A green sphere of energy formed in his palm, glowing and humming with power. In a shocking twist, instead of using it on the bullies who had just beaten the black-haired boy, he launched the attack straight at the boy lying on the ground. The impact sent the boy reeling. He cried out in pain and surprise, completely caught off guard. Onlookers around them began to murmur in confusion, voices rising in the crowd. People questioned what was happening. They were baffled. After all, it was supposed to be the last day. Yet somehow, there was still chaos breaking out. Amid the commotion, the red-haired boy turned and began to walk away from the scene, throwing one last cold remark over his shoulder. He told the injured boy to watch where he was going next time, calling him a loser. Still on the ground, the black-haired boy struggled to move. He groaned as he pushed himself up, coughing weakly. More comments started flying from nearby students. They recognized the boy and groaned at the sight of him, clearly annoyed. Some insulted him outright, calling him lame and deciding to leave without wasting another glance. Even the boys who had attacked him were leaving now. One of them threw a parting shot, telling the injured boy that he was lucky to even be hit by someone like Rayleigh. Normally, someone like him wouldn't even be allowed to stand near such a person. Not far from the scene, Rayleigh asked the green-haired girl if she felt sorry for the boy. She responded quickly, denying it. She claimed she hadn't even realized it was him. As the others walked away, the same bullies grumbled about the trouble the boy always seemed to cause. They complained that even on the last day, he was still making problems and warned him not to get in their way again. Still bruised and on the ground, the black-haired boy slowly sat up. His thoughts reflected a sense of exhaustion. This wasn't the first time it had happened. He wondered to himself if they never got tired of tormenting him. A few other students watching from a distance laughed among themselves. One of them joked that he must have missed a good show, while another, unaware of the full story, laughed about how the black-haired boy had apparently provoked Rayleigh. They didn't understand why he would even try something like that. Some of them vaguely remembered him, struggling to recall his name, calling him Quinn or Quila or something like that. Another chimed in, dismissing him as just another powerless freeloader living off government subsidies. The boy, hearing all this, said nothing. He quietly got to his feet and began walking away. Behind his back, the mocking continued. One person teased another for not even knowing their classmate's name. Another sarcastically asked if they wanted to go be friends with him, and then cruelly joked that hanging around trash might be contagious. As the black-haired boy walked on, he reflected grimly in his mind. In this world, not having supernatural powers was seen as a crime. People like him didn't even have the strength to fight the Dalki. Even within school walls, they were treated as less than human, constantly looked down upon, pushed aside, and ridiculed. Suddenly, a public announcement echoed across the city. A news broadcast marked the 5th anniversary of the peace treaty signed with the Dalki. The message emphasized that, despite a period of global peace, unrest still persisted in some areas. The announcer urged people everywhere to support and understand one another in hopes of easing future tensions. Unmoved by the message, the boy kept walking, heading toward his home. His thoughts turned to what awaited him next, the military academy. He was expected to report there the following day. But deep inside, a worry lingered. What if he still couldn't awaken supernatural powers? After the long day, Quinn finally reached home. The air inside was still and silent, echoing the solitude he lived in. Without hesitation, he went straight for a box tucked away in his room, something he hadn't touched in a while. As he lifted the lid, the contents revealed themselves. A power book with a strange, ominous design, its cover marked by what looked like the open mouth of a demon. He stared at it quietly, lost in thought. Power. That word echoed in his mind. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't shake the feeling that nothing in his life would really change, not with or without it. He looked at the book again, calling it what it was, a power book. But it brought more than just thoughts of strength. It stirred memories, painful ones. He recalled a moment from his past, the day when everything changed. That day, Several men in black suits had appeared at his doorstep. He had opened the door, confused and curious, only to be met with serious faces. They had asked if this was the home of Quinn Talon. Well, he confirmed with a nervous voice. They introduced themselves as official agents from the Special Task Force. Then came the devastating news: his parents had died in the war. The words had struck him like thunder. The agents continued, explaining that after conducting investigations, they'd found no relatives or potential foster families for him. He was alone. One of the men presented a box, opening it in front of him. Until he came of age, they said, the government would cover his tuition and living expenses. Among the items inside the box was a power book, part of the inheritance his parents had left behind. Alongside, it was a paper for him to sign. There was no money, they had explained, but perhaps the book might be worth something. Whether to keep it or sell it, they left that decision up to him. Now, back in the present, Quinn sat staring at that very same book. His heart ached as he thought of his parents. Mom, Dad, why did you have to go to war? He wondered silently. Why did you leave me all alone? All he had left of them was this locked power book, and he couldn't even open it. He grit his teeth in frustration and tried once again to pry it open, but it remained firmly sealed. With a sigh, he gave up and muttered to himself that it still wouldn't budge. He figured he'd just have to accept one of the standard government-issued books at the academy instead. He glanced back at the book, disappointment heavy in his eyes. More than this useless, locked relic, he wished they'd left behind a photograph, something, anything, to help him remember their faces. They were already starting to fade from memory. Just then, he felt a warm trickle from his nose. It was bleeding again, likely from the earlier beating. Without thinking, he grabbed a tissue and frantically tried to wipe away the drops before they stained the book. He cursed softly to himself, realizing he must have pressed too hard. Thankfully, the surface was still cleanable. But as he wiped the blood away, something unexpected happened. The book suddenly rose into the air, hovering in front of him, glowing with a strange red aura. Quinn's eyes widened in panic. Papers began to swirl around him, filling the room in a chaotic dance, and a storm of energy burst forth. The book, now surrounded by the supernatural force, began to open on its own. Pages started flipping rapidly, one after another. Quinn could only stare, stunned, and whispered in disbelief. The book was opening. Then, without warning, a concentrated beam of light shot out from the book and pierced straight into his forehead. The sensation overwhelmed him. Confused and sweating, he clutched his head, struggling to understand what was happening. What is this? He thought in panic. It's going into my head. The beam grew brighter and stronger, flooding into his mind. Pain tore through his head, and he dropped to his knees, unable to bear the pressure. His thoughts scrambled. My head. It hurts. The moment the light finally faded, he collapsed completely to the ground. And right then, as his consciousness slipped away, a glowing notification appeared in front of him. It simply read, "Congratulations. You have obtained." Through blurry vision, barely clinging to awareness, Quinn managed to read the first part of the message. His thoughts stumbled over the words. I got vampire. What? Then everything went black as he lost consciousness on the floor. Quinn found himself lost in a memory, one from years ago. He had seen other children playing nearby and had slowly approached them, hopeful and a little nervous. With quiet eagerness, he tried to join in, yearning for a sense of belonging. But before he could even finish expressing himself, one of the children harshly pushed him away with words, making it clear he wasn't welcome. Another questioned why anyone would want to associate with someone like him, sneering at the fact that he was an orphan. They whispered judgments, mocking him for supposedly lacking manners or worth. Suddenly, the scene shifted in his memory. Two men had appeared behind him, each holding a photograph, pictures of Quinn's parents. That day, those strangers had delivered devastating news. His mother and father had died in the war. The shock of it all overwhelmed him. Surrounded by the judgment of other kids and the cold reality of loss, Quinn could only panic and grieve in silence. Snapping out of the dream, Quinn awoke lying on the floor of his room, dazed but conscious. A loud, impatient voice echoed from outside his door. Someone was calling his name urgently. He heard the countdown begin, a threat that they wouldn't wait much longer. Startled, Quinn jumped to his feet and rushed to the door, apologizing anxiously as he opened it. Outside, a few stern military officers stood waiting. One of them, Sergeant Griff, barked at him, irritated that Quinn had taken so long to respond. Still groggy and flustered, Quinn tried to explain that he had overslept, but the sergeant wasn't interested in excuses. Pointing toward a bus parked nearby, he gave Quinn just 2 minutes to gather his belongings and board. Panic surged through Quinn. He scrambled back into his room, mentally retracing the events of the night before. He remembered examining the mysterious ability book. A jolt of realization hit him. He was pretty sure he'd managed to open it. While rushing, his gaze fell on his glasses, now lying broken on the floor. With a sigh of frustration, he bemoaned the fact that he'd need to get them replaced again. But something odd caught his attention. As he rubbed his eyes and looked again, he realized his vision was perfectly clear. For the first time in years, he could see without his glasses. It took him a moment to fully grasp it, but it hit him. He was no longer nearsighted. Just then, Griff shouted again from outside, furious at the continued delay. Quinn, still in disbelief over his vision, quickly snapped out of it and rushed out the door, shouting back in a panic that he was coming. As he hurried toward the bus, Griff stood with arms crossed, glaring at him. The sergeant's tone was sharp. He clearly wasn't in the mood for lateness. Quinn mumbled an apology and was told to find a seat immediately. Climbing onto the bus, Quinn scanned for an empty seat. He noticed the same red-haired boy from earlier, Rayleigh, sitting by the aisle. Nervously, Quinn asked if he could squeeze in. But Rayleigh, without even making eye contact, bluntly shut him down, saying the seat was taken. Quinn looked around. The other passengers weren't exactly welcoming either. Their stares were cold, disapproving, and left him feeling even more isolated. It seemed luck wasn't on his side. There were no other seats available. Still standing awkwardly, Quinn met Rayleigh's eyes again, only for the boy to glare at him in irritation, questioning if there was a problem. But before the moment could escalate, a voice called out from behind. A cheerful boy with bright yellow hair pointed to an open seat next to him and invited Quinn over with genuine friendliness. Surprised by the sudden kindness, Quinn smiled with gratitude and made his way to the back. As he sat down, he quietly appreciated the warmth of the gesture. The yellow-haired boy introduced himself with a grin. His name was Woden. Smiling back, Quinn reached out to shake his hand and introduce himself as well. For the first time that day, things were starting to feel just a little better. Suddenly, a translucent figure resembling a vampire ghost hovered beside the protagonist. A glowing system notification appeared above his head, declaring that an ability activation had been detected, but immediately denied. The ghost-like entity seemed visibly irritated by this, its expression turning slightly annoyed. Meanwhile, the protagonist was caught off guard. It was his first time hearing such a notification sound, and a mild panic set in. Confused, he turned toward the floating message, wondering what exactly he was looking at. The thought crossed his mind, was he the only one seeing this? As uncertainty filled him, he tentatively raised a finger toward the strange display, trying to get someone's attention or possibly ask for help. The yellow-haired boy nearby noticed the protagonist's odd behavior. His expression softened, clearly sensing something strange was going on. Then, in a sudden shift of energy, the boy let out a cheerful laugh. He apologized for the confusion, then asked the protagonist a direct question about his special ability, clearly assuming that everyone had one. Caught off guard again, the protagonist began to sweat nervously. He gave a hesitant reply, explaining that he hadn't awakened any ability yet. But in his mind, he was puzzled by the sudden interest. Why was this guy asking him that out of nowhere? The yellow-haired boy seemed taken aback by the response. He admitted that it was unusual for someone their age to be without an ability and said it was his first time meeting someone in that situation. The protagonist, still sweating, awkwardly responded that people like him were rare and that most others had already developed abilities by now. But before the conversation could go any further, the loud voice of Sergeant Griff thundered from the front of the bus. He shouted at everyone to keep quiet, demanding to know why there was so much noise. His words carried weight, reminding the students that they weren't on a leisure trip, but headed to a military academy. The entire bus fell silent in an instant. the students quickly covering their mouths in nervous obedience. Meanwhile, the protagonist gave an awkward laugh, thinking to himself about the flashing notification that had been hovering in front of him all this time. He turned his attention back to it, pondering whether this could be connected to the ability book he had opened the day before. A flood of information had entered his mind when he'd accessed that book. Maybe it had somehow merged with him. That idea sparked another possibility in his mind. Could it be that he had awakened an ability after all? As he examined the system panel more closely, he noticed something new and tapped on it, hoping for answers. But to his frustration, the screens provided no useful information, only vague or incomplete details. Just then, sunlight streamed in through the bus window. As it hit him directly, the protagonist suddenly felt a wave of pain and weakness crash over him. Sweat poured down his face as confusion turned into concern. He could feel his strength draining rapidly. At the same time, the system began flashing urgent warnings, alerting him that he was being exposed to direct sunlight, and his stats were being cut in half. As sunlight streamed into the bus, the protagonist began to struggle. He felt his strength drain rapidly and stared at the glowing system panel in front of him. His eyes widened as he read the message. All of his stats had been reduced by 50%. Panic surged through him. He frantically scanned his system screen. It confirmed the decrease. Every attribute had been halved. Alarmed, he quickly reached for the curtain and yanked it shut, blocking the sun's harsh rays. Sweat poured down his face as he tried to steady his breathing. The thought hit him hard. Just a little exposure to sunlight had caused this much damage. How dangerous was this ability? Could he really be forced to avoid the sun for the rest of his life? As the curtain shielded him, the system began showing signs of recovery. Watching the status indicators slowly climb back to normal, he wiped the sweat from his face and felt a small wave of relief wash over him. The yellow-haired boy sitting next to him noticed his pale face and leaned in, genuinely concerned. He asked if something was wrong. He looked sick. The protagonist brushed it off quickly, avoiding the question by saying he probably just hadn't slept well the night before. The boy didn't press the issue. Instead, he reached for his bag and handed the protagonist a bottle of water, suggesting he drink something and rest since the ride ahead was still long. Grateful, the protagonist took the bottle, muttered thanks, and began drinking. But just as he swallowed, a system notification appeared again. This time, it congratulated him. Drinking water was part of a daily task, and he just earned 5 experience points. The surprise made him choke, and he accidentally spat water forward. The sudden cold splash caused the boy to yell out instinctively. His voice echoed through the bus, catching the attention of Sergeant Griff. The sergeant turned sharply, glaring in irritation. He barked at the boy, questioning whether he thought this was some kind of joke. Embarrassed and panicking, the boy tried to explain himself. But the sergeant wasn't interested in excuses. He ordered him to step forward and squat on the spot. The boy pointed back toward the protagonist, still trying to explain what had happened, but the instructor wasn't having it. Meanwhile, the protagonist watched everything unfold and thought to himself, was everything being counted as a mission now? Even drinking water? The yellow-haired boy, still flustered, warned the protagonist to slow down next time so he didn't choke again. But the protagonist was more focused on the system panel floating in front of him. He thought deeply about what this strange ability really was. Unlike others who awakened a single supernatural skill and improved it through training and study, his felt like some kind of game interface. He hadn't yet figured out how it worked or what his true power even was. Apart from the improvement in his eyesight, nothing concrete had revealed itself. He turned to the yellow-haired boy beside him to ask a question, calling him by name. But the boy had already dozed off. The protagonist was surprised by how quickly he had fallen asleep. He glanced around and noticed that nearly everyone else on the bus had nodded off as well. Suddenly, a system notification flashed in red. An airborne contaminant had been detected. Drowsiness was setting in, and resistance had increased by 1. His body was trying to fight off the effects of something in the air. Moments later, Sergeant Griff appeared again, this time wearing a gas mask. He looked directly at the protagonist, noting with interest that someone was still awake despite the sleep gas. He said that they'd have to give this one special treatment and ordered the dose to be increased. The protagonist's vision blurred as his system began to flash additional warnings. The drowsiness intensified. His eyes burned as he struggled to keep them open, but it was no use. Everything went dark. Sometime later, in a dimly lit room, the covering over the protagonist's face was removed. As his senses slowly returned, he heard a voice nearby. The yellow-haired boy was sitting beside him and casually remarked on how soundly the protagonist had slept. Rubbing his head and trying to orient himself, the protagonist asked where they were. The yellow-haired boy stood and replied that they had arrived at the military academy. He had only just woken up himself and didn't yet know the details of their situation. Just then, 3 other students began to stir. As they noticed each other, they realized they were now a group of 5. One of them greeted the others shyly, confirming that all 5 had regained consciousness. Right on cue, a woman appeared in front of them, clearly someone in authority. She was accompanied by an assistant and carried herself with the calm confidence of a test proctor. She looked over the group with a mild smile and announced that they were finally awake. It was time for the test. As the test proceeded, the assistant reassured everyone by stepping forward confidently beside his superior. He explained that this was merely a supernatural ability test, a basic step before officially entering the academy. Everyone just had to wait until their name was called, and then step forward for the assessment. Then, the assistant called out the first name, Peter Chuck. A confused boy, hearing his name, pointed at himself with surprise, confirming if he had really been called. Watching all this unfold from behind, the protagonist, still processing the sudden events, was caught off guard. In his mind, he questioned how the tests were starting so quickly when he hadn't even figured out what his own ability was yet. The proctor, addressing Peter with excitement and a friendly demeanor, tried to ease the boy's nerves. She asked him what his supernatural ability was. The boy hesitantly responded, admitting that he didn't have one. That simple response drew attention. A nearby girl was visibly shocked, almost in disbelief that someone still didn't have powers at this stage. Trying to lighten the mood, a cheerful blonde-haired student standing nearby chimed in, saying that it was okay. There was still a chance to awaken a power right now. Hearing this made the protagonist feel slightly more at ease. In his thoughts, he acknowledged that he wasn't the only one in their age group who hadn't awakened powers yet. Trying to encourage Peter, the proctor gestured toward her assistant and told Peter to come forward. Then the assistant summoned a mysterious book, and the proctor offered it to Peter. She explained that through this book, he could also gain a supernatural ability. Peter stared at the book with hesitation, asking if it was truly free. The proctor confidently assured him that it was. She then informed Peter that, for now, he would be classified as a level 1 ability user. She advised him to study the book in his own time and told him he could return for another test after learning how to use it. Grateful, Peter glanced at his wrist, noticing a band wrapped around it. He thanked the proctor. Watching him, the protagonist curiously looked down at his own wrist and was surprised to find the same band had somehow appeared on his wrist as well. He didn't even remember putting it on. From behind him, the girl from earlier helpfully explained that everyone had one of those wristbands. She'd heard that they stored each student's information, acted as a school access pass, and could even be used to buy snacks. The blonde-haired boy from earlier jumped in again, saying how convenient the wristband was. Suddenly, the proctor loudly called out the next name, Quinn Taryn. Hearing his name, the protagonist was a bit startled. He didn't expect his turn to come up so quickly. He stepped forward and stood in front of the proctor. She looked at him and asked what his ability was. But this struck the protagonist as odd. She clearly had his file, yet she was asking anyway. Internally, he found it suspicious but kept a neutral face. Calmly, he responded that he didn't have any abilities either. Just like with Peter, the assistant summoned a book again. The proctor offered it to him the same way. But this time, something unexpected happened. A notification appeared in front of the protagonist. It wasn't a regular message, but a system alert. It informed him that he couldn't learn the ability and gave him the option to exchange the book for 10 XP instead. The protagonist began to sweat as his thoughts raced. Everyone was supposed to be able to awaken only one ability. If he couldn't learn anything from the book, did that mean he already had an ability? He wondered whether he should exchange the book for experience points. The offer was tempting, but he worried that doing so might raise too many questions and draw unnecessary attention. Putting on a disappointed expression, he stood in front of the proctor as she started preparing to announce the next name. She hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. At that moment, the protagonist handed the book back to her and politely declined. He said he didn't need it. After hearing the protagonist's quiet refusal, the proctor looked genuinely puzzled. She questioned him again, making sure he really wanted to turn down the skill book. It was free, after all, and if he missed this opportunity, he'd be on his own trying to figure things out later. Beads of sweat formed on the protagonist's forehead, but he stood by his decision. He calmly responded that he understood the consequences and would manage by himself. Slightly concerned, the proctor turned to her assistant and asked him to wait. She made a quick call, reporting that a student named Quinn Taryn had declined the skill book, which was highly unusual. The voice on the other end of the call asked if Quinn was a member of the Pure Blood faction. The proctor replied that it was unlikely. His records didn't list any special talents, nor did he possess beast armor equipment. The voice instructed her to give the student a potential test. If he turned out to be just another ordinary person, then it was best to leave him be. The harsh realities of the world would teach him in time. Acknowledging the order, the proctor ended the call. She then turned back to the protagonist and, with a calm tone, apologized for the delay. Since he had refused the skill book, she directed him toward a door and said they would proceed straight to a physical test, this one held outside. Hearing the word outside, the protagonist hesitated. Sunlight had already proven dangerous to him. Once inside the testing area, he was faced with 3 training dummies. The proctor instructed him to destroy them as quickly as possible. But even as he stared at the targets, he could feel his body weakening. His vision blurred. He thought to himself that it had to be the sunlight again, sapping his strength. Knowing he had no other choice, he braced himself and went all out. The proctor observed carefully, mentally noting his stats as he fought. Strength 5. She thought to herself how weak it was. She continued analyzing, agility also 5. The numbers were unimpressive. When the test ended, she announced the result. His physical ability was equivalent to a level 1 ability user. With the test complete, she told Quinn Taryn he was free to go. As he exited, the protagonist looked down at his wristband. The score she had given him matched exactly what the system had shown earlier. That thought led him to a realization. If he could somehow raise the values in the system, perhaps he could really increase his physical abilities. But the sun still bore down on him, and even outside the test room, he found himself wincing at the discomfort. Being constantly affected by sunlight was becoming unbearable. The proctor then called out the next name, Layla Mulo. Layla stepped forward eagerly, responding that it was her turn. She seemed full of energy. Just then, the blonde-haired boy from earlier approached the protagonist again and handed him a bottle of water. He offered words of encouragement, reminding him that there were still 2 years left to improve. The protagonist accepted the bottle, quietly thanking him. As he drank, he felt slightly better, now that he had found shade from the sun. Meanwhile, Layla stood ready in front of the proctor. When asked what her ability was, she answered proudly it was a psychic ability. The proctor acknowledged that and told her to begin the test. From nearby, the blonde-haired boy watched her with some surprise. He had assumed she was a pureblood. That prompted the protagonist to ask what that term meant. The blonde-haired boy explained. Purebloods were a group of people who rejected extraordinary powers altogether. They believed society's obsession with supernatural abilities was warped, and that this power supremacy mentality was what caused the social divides of their time. As Layla began her test, the boy elaborated further. Purebloods focused on beast armor weaponry and rigorous physical training. They aimed to fight against the Darky race using only the strength of ordinary human bodies. The protagonist, putting the pieces together, commented thoughtfully, so the blonde-haired boy had assumed Layla was a pureblood because she had used a beast bone bow and arrow earlier. The test didn't take long. With a powerful kick, Layla completed it. The proctor then announced her result. Level 2 ability user. Upon hearing the test result, Layla was visibly shocked and upset. Her voice rose in disbelief as she protested the result, She had been graded as a level 3 at her previous school, so being classified as level 2 now felt like a downgrade. The proctor responded calmly, explaining that while Layla's archery performance had met the level J equals 4x standard, one of the targets had been destroyed by hand. That strike revealed an average strength value of 8, which brought down the overall evaluation. For that reason, she could only be classified as a level 2. Sensing Layla's frustration, the proctor reassured her that there would be plenty more opportunities to test and improve in the future, so she shouldn't let one result weigh her down. Then, she called the next name on the list, Eileen Hare. Layla's expression darkened, with visible irritation as she walked off. At the same time, a yellow-haired girl began heading toward the test area. The blonde-haired boy from earlier tapped her on the shoulder and casually mentioned that it was her turn and jokingly noted how lucky she was to be the last one called. But Eileen wasn't amused. She gave the boy a cold glare and told him to take his hand off her. The boy laughed it off, suggesting she didn't need to be so tense. But before he could finish his thought, Eileen activated her power. Ice quickly spread across his hand, freezing it in place. She walked off with a threatening warning. If he ever touched her again without permission, next time it wouldn't end so mildly. Staring at his frost-covered hand in disbelief, the blonde-haired boy panicked slightly. He recognized her ability immediately. It was ice-based, and joked that the cold in her attitude matched her powers, saying he almost got frostbite. The proctor, observing this, addressed Eileen directly and asked her to begin the test, confirming her ability as ice-based. Eileen acknowledged and stepped into the testing room. As she entered, the blonde-haired boy turned to the protagonist, clearly impressed. He muttered that he'd been right. Eileen was powerful. The protagonist, still sipping his water, gave him a glance and remarked, a little awkwardly, that it wasn't wise to touch people without permission. Eileen, in particular, seemed like someone not to be messed with. The blonde-haired boy grumbled in frustration, saying he wouldn't mind sparring with someone like her. But he added that, despite everything, he wasn't the kind of guy who hit pretty girls. Moments later, inside the testing room, Eileen effortlessly destroyed all 3 training dummies in an instant. The proctor watched, visibly impressed. After a quick evaluation, she announced the result. Eileen Hare had achieved the level 5 ability user rank. She was now the 3rd student that day to be graded that high. Outside, both the protagonist and a glasses-wearing boy were stunned. The boy wearing glasses whispered in awe, amazed that someone could reach level 5. The protagonist quietly agreed, noting that back at their school, level 4 had been the highest rank anyone had achieved. Layla, overhearing the conversation, made a frustrated remark, insisting that she'd catch up and surpass Eileen soon. The proctor called the next name, Warden's phone. Warden's lit up with energy and excitement. It was finally his turn. As Eileen exited the testing room, the protagonist caught a glimpse inside and felt an odd sense of confusion. Something about what he saw made him freeze up. Internally, he was stunned. What was happening inside looked exactly the same as what Eileen had done. Inside the room, Warden's was mimicking the same attack style and abilities that Eileen had just demonstrated. He destroyed the targets with ease, using ice powers identical to hers. The proctor observed his performance with growing enthusiasm. She confirmed the result. Warden's phone was also a level 5 ability user. When Warden's came out of the room, he walked straight toward the protagonist, grinning with pride. He eagerly asked what the protagonist thought of his performance. The protagonist, still in shock, commented in amazement. He had figured something out. Warden's wasn't just powerful. He could copy abilities by touching someone else's body. Warden's looked caught off guard. He began to sweat, surprised the protagonist had seen through his secret so easily. He asked how the protagonist had figured it out. The protagonist explained his reasoning. Earlier, during their handshake, Warden's had shown a flicker of surprise, likely because his copying ability had failed. Then, when Eileen froze his hand, his reaction showed unfamiliarity with ice powers. Piecing that together, there could only be one conclusion. Warden stared at the protagonist, impressed. Despite not having any obvious extraordinary power, Quinn had read him perfectly. He admitted that he hadn't expected someone like Quinn to be so perceptive. The protagonist simply smiled and brushed it off, saying he had just happened to notice the details. But inside, his thoughts were racing. His body had somehow passively rejected Warden's copying ability. That could only mean one thing. Whatever his ability was, it wasn't ordinary. He glanced at the system interface again, still unable to understand the true nature of his power. It felt elusive, undefined. At that moment, Eileen suddenly appeared behind Warden's. Her tone was curious, but composed. She asked if Quinn was a native ability user. Quinn's mind flashed with the meaning of that term. Native ability users were those born with their powers, unlike those who receive them through books or training. Legend said that all powers found in modern skill books had originally been inherited from these naturally gifted individuals. With a carefree grin on his face, the yellow-haired boy teasingly offered a challenge to Eileen, inviting her to guess his ability, promising a reward if she got it right. Eileen, however, clearly unimpressed, dismissed him without interest and walked off, calling him boring. Meanwhile, the protagonist observed their interaction silently, a thought stirring in his mind. Could Wardens be one of them, a native ability user? Before he could reflect further, the proctor redirected everyone's attention. She gestured toward a large machine and announced that the tests were officially over. It was now time to proceed to the military academy. Cheers erupted, especially from the boy with glasses, who raised his hands in celebration. The proctor reminded them to load their skill books into the transport pod along with their luggage, assuring the students that the academy staff would handle everything from there. Moments later, the transport pod lifted into the sky with a low mechanical hum, carrying the students toward their new life. As the cityscape of the military academy came into view, the glasses-wearing boy was struck by awe. It looked nothing like what he had expected. Far from a rigid military compound, it resembled a vast, thriving metropolis. The protagonist, equally stunned, found himself quietly whispering admiration for the place's grandeur. Their group soon merged into a large crowd of other students. Small groups were chatting energetically, exchanging test results and reconnecting with acquaintances. Someone recognized a friend in the crowd, excitedly calling out and asking about their ability rank. One claimed to be level 2, another proudly stated they'd reached level 3. They laughed and agreed to explore the academy together, full of hope and enthusiasm. The protagonist and his bespectacled friend stood quietly on the sidelines, watching the lively interactions unfold. A shared glance between them reflected a quiet realization. They were clearly on the lower end of this hierarchy. The phrase echoed in their minds like a bitter truth. Bottom of the hierarchy, LVI students times 2. Nearby, the red-haired boy from earlier was also approached by someone from his past. The student eagerly reminded him that they had attended the same school once. The red-haired boy acknowledged it with a dry response, not particularly thrilled. Meanwhile, Eileen was getting swarmed. Girls and boys alike hovered near her, trying to confirm her identity. A few whispered among themselves, certain she was the level 5 ability user they'd heard about. One girl even pointed directly at her, confidently declaring it was her. Soon, a flood of eager introductions and flattery followed. Students vied for her attention. One offered to treat her to a meal. Others proudly shared their own ranks, hoping to forge a connection. Level 3s and 4s stepped forward, desperate to associate with someone of her caliber. The scene turned chaotic as voices overlapped, each trying to outdo the other, some shouting over their peers, pushing others aside, and dismissing anyone who didn't meet their standards. The protagonist and the glasses-wearing boy stood unnoticed in the middle of it all, as though they were invisible. The crowd buzzed around them, but no one spared them a glance. They were the worthless duo in the eyes of this social jungle. Looking around uncomfortably, the boy with glasses nervously commented on the behavior of their peers. It was clear everyone wanted to align themselves with stronger students. The protagonist, calm but quietly disappointed, acknowledged that this new environment wasn't so different from the outside world after all. Just then, a teacher appeared, holding a wooden box in hand. He called out for order, instructing all students to separate into lines by gender. Each student would step forward to draw a number, which would determine their assigned dormitory. Afterward, they could collect their belongings and head to their rooms. As students began queuing up, the boy with glasses looked around curiously, wondering aloud where Wardens had gone. The protagonist speculated that he was probably being surrounded by other students. After all, he was also a level 5 user, and likely as popular as Eileen by now. In the line, students drew their numbers one by one. A boy examined his ball and murmured his result, number 22. Then another, number 23. He wondered what kind of people he'd be paired with. The boy with glasses soon picked a ball as well. Coincidentally, his number turned out to be 23 too. He looked pleased, perhaps hoping for a good roommate. Suddenly, another student approached the protagonist and casually asked for his number. The protagonist looked down and read it aloud, number 12. Without hesitation, the boy pressed his number ball against both of theirs, switching the assignments without permission. With a smirk and a wave, he told the two to get along and quickly disappeared into the crowd before either of them could protest. The protagonist blinked in confusion, calling after him, but the stranger was already gone. At that moment, the boy wearing glasses, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened, began to cry. He felt defeated and muttered to himself in despair, convinced that no one would ever want to associate with someone like him. He apologized to the protagonist, believing he had only dragged him down. But the protagonist, slightly awkward and surprised by his words, turned to him and reassured him. He reminded the glasses-wearing boy that they were both still at level 1, and there was nothing to feel bad about. He encouraged him, saying that their life at the military academy was just beginning, and they would both grow stronger from here. The boy with glasses tried to respond, wanted to say something more, but before he could finish, a cheerful voice suddenly cut in. The blonde-haired boy entered the room energetically, expressing curiosity about who else had been assigned to dormitory number 23. The protagonist looked up and immediately recognized him, surprised to see him there. The boy with glasses also lit up in excitement, happily noting how unexpected and fortunate it was to all be in the same dorm together. With a big grin, the blonde-haired boy pulled both of them into a friendly hug. He was clearly thrilled, remarking how lucky they were to have ended up together, and proposed that they should get along well over the next 2 years. Hearing those words, the glasses-wearing boy was deeply moved. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time they were from joy. He was grateful that someone didn't mind being in the same dormitory as him and felt genuinely touched by the warmth he was being shown. Meanwhile, in a different part of the academy, two boys were in the middle of a heated argument. One of them was incredulous after hearing that the other's dormitory had been taken. The boy confirmed it, calling it a completely unexpected disaster. He turned around, fuming, and exclaimed that whoever had taken his dorm was unbelievable, so shameless. He urged his friend to come along so they could confront the person and take back what was his. But the other boy, already aware of who the new occupant was, gave up with a resigned sigh. He told his friend to forget it, saying he had no choice but to accept his bad luck. After all, the person who took over his dorm was a level 5 ability user, someone far too powerful to challenge. Back in dormitory 23, the blonde-haired boy was still hugging both the protagonist and the boy with glasses. The atmosphere had shifted, no longer heavy or sorrowful, but light, warm, and full of camaraderie. The scene shifts to the dormitory, where the protagonist's two friends, the cheerful yellow-haired boy and the calm, glasses-wearing boy, are having a light conversation. The yellow-haired boy, sounding relaxed, brings up the idea of spending their free time somewhere fun now that they're done with their activities. But the boy with glasses, already immersed in a book about powers, politely declines. He wants to unpack and dive into studying his newly acquired skill book, showing his commitment to developing his abilities. Then, turning to the protagonist, the yellow-haired boy asks if he'd like to join him. The protagonist, thoughtful as always, chooses a different path. He expresses interest in visiting the library instead. Internally, he's driven by the urgent need to understand his unusual power. He's hoping to find relevant information in the library that might shed some light on his current situation. The yellow-haired boy chuckles at his friend's choice and good-naturedly decides to join him. He hasn't picked up a book in a while, so he figures it's as good a time as any to study hard too. Once the two arrive at the library, they're surprised to find it bustling with students. The protagonist, caught off guard by the crowd, is struck by how silent the room is despite so many people present. Everyone's mouths are moving, but no voices can be heard. It's an odd, almost eerie scene for him. Carrying stacks of books, the protagonist and his friend head toward an empty table. The yellow-haired boy brings up the fact that public schools don't usually have advanced setups like this. Then he demonstrates a special device built into the table lamp. By touching it, a soundproof barrier is activated around them. It allows private conversations without disturbing others. The protagonist, clearly impressed, admits it's his first time seeing such advanced technology and marvels at how far things have come. They settle in and begin flipping through their books. Seeing how many the protagonist grabbed, the yellow-haired boy curiously asks if he's researching something. Without breaking focus from the pages, the protagonist explains that he didn't accept the free skill book from the academy, so he's now trying to study what kinds of extraordinary powers exist. He hopes to find one that aligns better with his own ability. The yellow-haired boy, always quick with a joke, teases that he thought the protagonist wanted to become a pure blood member, then laughs, saying it looks more like he just didn't want to become a soldier blindly serving the military. That comment confuses the protagonist. The term military dog doesn't sit right with him, and he asks what that means. The yellow-haired boy then gives him a reality check. He explains that the free skill books come with strings attached. They aren't gifts from a generous military. Those who accept them will eventually have to follow military orders, even being sent to the battlefield. In the end, he says they're treated as expendable, not soldiers but human shields. Hearing this, the protagonist falls silent, his thoughts drifting to Peter, the boy with glasses who had eagerly accepted the book from the proctor. His expression turns somber. He quietly wonders whether Peter knows what he's really signed up for. Our protagonist suddenly turned to the yellow-haired boy and asked him if he'd ever heard of an ability that gets weaker in sunlight. The question caught the yellow-haired boy completely off guard. For a moment, he was stunned, then burst out laughing. He clearly thought the idea was ridiculous, and jokingly told the protagonist that abilities don't weaken from sunlight. Humans aren't vampires, after all. He went on to explain that if someone appears weak, it's usually because they lack control over their acquired abilities or their ability itself has serious limitations. But sunlight? That was just fantasy nonsense in his view. Hearing that, the protagonist couldn't help but let out a slightly awkward laugh, agreeing with him, even though deep down, the question had real weight. A little while later, the yellow-haired boy dozed off while pretending to read. Seeing that, the protagonist closed his book and thought to himself that, just as he suspected, none of the books he had gone through so far explained his condition. Still determined, he decided to head upstairs and check the rest of the library for more information. Upstairs, while reading through more books, he came across one with a title that caught his eye. It was about a red dragon reincarnated as a human. The concept intrigued him briefly, and he noted the authors, Lenny Steele and Ray Talon. But quickly, his face turned disappointed. He returned the book to the shelf, realizing it was just fantasy fiction. Dragons, vampires, and creatures like that. None of it should relate to his real condition. He noticed it was nearly dinner time, so he decided to skim through one more book before heading back. As he flipped through the next one, he began reading about vampire lore. There were descriptions of drinking human blood, turning into bats, casting illusions, and more. Some vampires were even masters of swordsmanship and hypnosis. The level of detail surprised him. It was almost as if the vampire system had subcategories and specializations. He put that book back too, but something was nagging at him. He quietly admitted to himself that even vampires sounded more structured and impressive than his current state. Yet there was one thing they had in common with him, the sunlight weakness. Right at that moment, a system notification popped up. It informed him that he had gained more understanding of the system and showed his current experience progress as 15 out of 100 in Class 10. He was completely shocked by this update. Was his awakening really linked to something like a vampire? His eyes locked onto the vampire book again. He began to panic, overwhelmed by what it all might mean. Could his ability really be vampire-related? Meanwhile, the yellow-haired boy woke up, stretching and yawning. He noticed his friend was gone and mumbled about how late it had gotten. He assumed the protagonist must have left already and walked off, slightly annoyed that he hadn't been woken up. Back downstairs, the protagonist was now surrounded by books all related to vampires. He was flipping through them rapidly, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe it. It was all starting to line up, and that made it even more unsettling. Then, another notification appeared. This one was different. It told him he had gained more understanding of the system, and that a new optional task had been unlocked. But when he looked at the details, the system itself seemed to grin at him, dark, eerie, almost like it had a life of its own. And the task? It asked him to drink the blood of a human. This threw him into a panic. Was the system seriously expecting him to do that? The realization hit hard. This wasn't just a weird ability. The path that was leading him down was something else entirely. As the scene progresses, our protagonist is seen walking quietly somewhere, lost in thought. In his mind, he reflects on what he's read in legends, that vampires survive by drinking human blood. Yet strangely, this system he's tied to hasn't compelled him to do that so far. However, the sunlight shining from the side begins to affect him, weakening his body. The system notifies him that his stats have been reduced by 50% due to sun exposure. Then, right after, a familiar message appears again. The same optional task pops up. He's prompted once more to drink human blood. Along with it, the system displays his daily tasks, reinforcing the idea that they're still available. As he continues walking, he weighs his options mentally. He considers that maybe if he actually completes this blood-drinking task, it might offer some sort of hidden benefit or unique reward. The daily tasks themselves seem like free experience points for now, so there's no harm in doing them. Glancing at the system, he realizes just how sensitive he is to light. Whether it's broad daylight or just the setting sun, even a small bit of sunlight makes him noticeably weaker. He shifts his attention to his current status panel, calculating his progress. If he sticks to just completing these daily tasks, it'll take him about 3 weeks to level up, not exactly fast, but steady. He begins to wonder if anything about him will change after leveling up again. Right then, something grabs his attention. Just ahead of him, he spots a familiar face, his friend Peter, the guy with glasses. Peter is being beaten up, clearly having been caught in a bad situation. Despite being hit, Peter tries to apologize nervously, insisting he didn't mean to bump into anyone. Watching this, the protagonist recognizes Peter instantly and internally reacts with surprise. Meanwhile, the bully towering over Peter doesn't back down. Instead, he sarcastically mocks Peter's apology, making a dramatic claim that if saying sorry fixed everything, there'd be no need for police. Then he demands compensation, his tone aggressive and smug. Peter, clearly intimidated and helpless, admits he doesn't have much money. The bully snaps again, yelling at him for being insensible and threatening to beat him further. The protagonist watches all of this unfold with quiet disgust. He can immediately sense the bully is only level 2, yet he's already abusing his slight advantage to pick on someone weaker. The protagonist mentally scoffs at this kind of arrogance, finding it pathetic. Without hesitation, he steps forward and purposely bumps into the bully, pretending to trip. The force of it is enough to knock the bully to the ground. The boy yells in outrage, demanding to know if the protagonist is blind. The protagonist responds with an innocent tone, claiming he just has a problem with tripping over flat ground, playing the situation off casually while secretly provoking him. Peter notices the situation and recognizes the protagonist, calling out his name. The bully gets up, annoyed, and checks the protagonist's level. Seeing that he's level 1, he sneers in disbelief. First Peter, now this guy? He grumbles that today must be cursed, first bumping into a weakling, and now another one. He then threatens the protagonist too, demanding money and warning him to back off if he doesn't want trouble. But the protagonist stands his ground. Calmly and confidently, he points out how he just got to this school and didn't expect to meet the classic bully so quickly, the kind who picks on those beneath him but folds in front of someone stronger. He clearly isn't intimidated. The bully mocks him in return, asking what exactly he plans to do about it. Right at that moment, a new system notification appears in front of the protagonist. It detects an enemy activating a skill or ability and instantly shifts his system into combat mode. Seeing this, the protagonist realizes he's about to fight for real. Instead of panicking, he's excited. This is the perfect opportunity. He was just wondering how combat works in practice, and now here it is. The system declares his first battle task: defeat the opponent. At that moment, a system notification appeared, assigning our protagonist a new task to defeat the bully. The task even came with a reward, 50 experience points. Motivated by the chance to level up, he immediately shifted into a fighting stance. In his mind, he calculated that if he could win this fight, leveling up was within reach. He didn't hesitate to confront the bully head-on, fully prepared to give it his all. Nearby, a bespectacled classmate observed the situation with shock, wondering why someone would willingly provoke such a dangerous opponent. The bully wasn't interested in playing around. His hand morphed into a beast-like lion's paw, and he lunged forward, aiming to finish the fight quickly. But our protagonist was fast. He dodged the first strike and used the momentum to land a clean counterattack. The bully was caught off guard and began to reassess his opponent. Based on the strength of the counter, he started to doubt whether this kid was really just level 1. He considered the possibility that the boy had the strength of a level 2, even if he might be lacking in other stats. But the clash wasn't without consequences. The bully's claw had scraped our protagonist, leaving a wound. Holding his injured arm, he analyzed the enemy's abilities. It was a close combat transformation type, he realized, powerful but possibly with a window of opportunity. He remembered a previous test where a girl with just 8 strength points had been classified as level 2. Drawing from that memory, he reflected on his own stats. As long as he stayed out of direct sunlight, all of his attributes hovered around 10. That meant he should also qualify as level 2. With this logic, he concluded that even in a direct confrontation, he had a real chance at victory. The battle resumed. They clashed again, and this time the bully managed to avoid the attack and landed another scratch. The bully analyzed his opponent mid-fight and concluded that the kid lacked agility. He wasn't fast enough to keep up. Feeling confident, the bully continued his assault, throwing out another insult as he landed another hit. Watching the exchange unfold, the boy with glasses called out in a panic, clearly worried. At the same time, the system issued a warning to our protagonist. His health was rapidly decreasing. He was down to just 2 health units out of 5. Glancing upward, he noticed the position of the sun. It was almost sunset. Just a moment later, the sun dipped below the horizon. Something changed. Our protagonist blocked the next attack with ease and grabbed the bully's arm. The bully was stunned, unable to understand how this was happening. His opponent had suddenly become faster, stronger. None of it made sense. Now fully confident, our protagonist prepared to counter. The bully, now fearful, attempted to backpedal and suggested they talk things out. But it was too late. The setting sun had triggered his hidden advantage. His vampiric stats were fully restored. His health, strength, speed, all of it surged back in an instant. Without holding back, he launched a full assault. The bully coughed up blood as the blows kept coming, relentless and overwhelming. Watching the fight, the classmate in glasses was completely stunned. He couldn't understand how Quinn, someone who had shown no signs of special ability before, could suddenly overpower such a strong opponent. After thoroughly defeating the bully, our protagonist tossed him to the ground. Looking down at his own hand, he couldn't help but smile. There was something sinister in it. For him, this was the true power of a vampire. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this manhwa. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you either in a new manhwa recap or in the next episode of this one. Until then, take care and bye-bye.